evening, we're looking at this theme of lost. That's our title for tonight. And we know that the Bible tells us in Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And we know that that includes our children as well. And so tonight we're going to be talking about the fact that our children are lost, which I think you'll all agree with me is very true. But the reality is it's not just our children that start out their lives lost. We also are in the same boat. And so as we talk tonight, I hope this will be a helpful look at your children and how to minister to them. But as I think you've seen through this whole series, it's a really helpful look at ourselves as well. Because the condition that our children are dealing with is a condition that we ourselves deal with as well, which really makes it a challenge, but it gives us even more opportunity to rely upon the Lord for His strength. Parenting, as you know, is not something that can be done in our own strength. We talked a few weeks ago about some of those power tools that we try to use to coerce or motivate or try to make our children do the right things. And we've learned over the period of this class, right, that the law can do what only the law can do, right? The law can show us our sin. The law can show our children their sin. But the only thing that can really change us is God's grace. We can only be transformed by the grace of God as He does a work, a transforming work in our lives. And I hope even if you were here this morning and heard the message about Peter and his inaccurate view of who Jesus was, I'm so thankful that God could change the heart of somebody like that old fisherman, Peter, and use him to become a great emissary of the gospel and a great worker for the Lord. But that's not where Peter started out. And when we look at our children, they don't start out as these great heroes of the faith. No, none of us do. And yet God takes very unlikely people, whether it's you or your children or Peter, and He, through His grace, transforms them into vessels that are fit for His service. And I'm so thankful for that God does that. I was thinking about that today as I had the opportunity to baptize Gabriel Dominguez, and just thinking about how God has worked in his life over the past 5 or 6 years that we've had the opportunity to know Him here at our church. Thinking about our 2 young ladies that are headed off to college this week, and just we haven't known Emma as long, but seeing how God has just been at work in both her and Sophie's life and their family's life to just continue to transform them for His glory. And that ought to encourage us as parents when we look at our own children, and when you're in the day-to-day and all the back and forth and all the squabbles and the noise and all of the rebellion or the sin or the foolishness or the childishness, to know that God is faithful and He's doing His work to transform as we continue to point our children towards the Lord. The principle we're looking at tonight is this, and you should see it there in your notes. As a parent, you're not just dealing with bad behavior, you're dealing with a condition that causes bad behavior. Why is that an important distinction? I think it's important to point this out because we can sometimes look at this and say, well, that just sounds like semantics, right? You're just adding a word. Well, it's not just bad behavior, it's a condition that causes bad behavior. Well, think of it this way. It would be as if we had a tree in here full of fruit, right? And we see the fruit on that tree. And that fruit might be not very good fruit. Maybe it's not very large, or maybe it has some sort of disease on the fruit, or it has some issue with the fruit itself. And we would look at that tree and we would say, the problem with this tree isn't just the fruit. No, the problem of this tree goes much deeper. It goes down to the root. And there's an issue down in the roots of this tree that is causing it to bear fruit that is not very good. And when we interact and live with our children on a day-to-day basis, we see their fruit all the time. But their fruit is not their biggest problem. Rather, it's a condition that's coming out of a root issue. And as, of course, you'll see tonight, it is their lostness. As we talk about this theme of lostness, I think that this is something that can change the way that you think about what God has called you to as a parent, because it will provide for you a very different way of interpreting those moments when your kids are driving you nuts And when they're born, you never think, oh, this one's going to drive me nuts, until you've had a few, and then you're like, well, now we know where this is going. But when they maybe seem intent on just resisting everything that you do, I think this theme will help you not to personalize things that at the core are not personal at all. I know in raising our children, there are times you think, what is wrong with them today? Do they just have it out for me? Like, am I the problem? Are they just trying to push all of my buttons? But this thought can keep you from allowing yourself to think that your child, your son or daughter, just woke up that morning with the single intention of driving you crazy. Like they just woke up and that was their mindset. This thought will explain why you have to deal with things not just once. Wouldn't that be nice? No, you have to deal with them over and over again. And this thought reinforces the significant spiritual nature of your role in the lives of your children. And what is that thought? Well, here's the thought that's vital to consider. In parenting, you're not just dealing with your child's wrong behaviors, but his condition. So as you're parenting, you're not just dealing with those behaviors, but conditions. And behaviors are one thing, right? And you can correct behaviors like, let's say you had a pet dog, right? You can correct those behaviors through certain means, but your child is not an animal. Your child is not a pet. And so it's not just about correcting behavior. You're trying to deal with a much deeper condition that each child is going through. I mean, it's really nice to see you sharing with your wife. So, here's what we need to understand. Because maybe you're thinking right now, well, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. I just want my daughter to eat her carrots. Or maybe you're thinking, I just want my son to learn how to pick up his clothes off the floor. I'm tired of my children arguing with me. I just want my kids to obey. If they would just do that, I would be satisfied. So, all the resistance that you have to deal with, all the fussing, complaining, the laziness, irresponsibility, all the sibling squabbles, all the foolish choices, those are all the fruit of something deeper. If you don't understand that deeper thing, you'll often settle for surface victory. Like, at least they were just quiet, right? Go to your room and leave me alone. Okay, well, they're maybe quiet in their room. That doesn't mean that the root issue has been dealt with. And if we don't deal with those root things, if we just live on the surface, then that will not lead to lasting change. Some parents may say, well, I just feel like nothing I do really works. Like it works for a little bit, but it doesn't really work. Or they ask, why do I have to deal with the same thing over and over again? Sadly, there are other parents who will quietly confess, I just can't wait till my child leaves home. And I hope we never get to that point, but it might come to that point for some of you at some point. Just think, oh, if this child would just leave home, then I would have some peace. When you don't know what you're dealing with, you become exhausted and discouraged, and you just keep taking more shots in the dark, trying to find some way to deal with it. So what does it mean to say that in parenting our kids that we're not dealing just with behavior, but with a condition? What does that really mean? Well, one sentence that came right out of the mouth of Jesus Christ, I think captures exactly what I'm talking about. And that's found in Luke 19:10. I think it's there in your notes. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. We will never understand the task that God has called us to and the things that we deal with every day until we understand what Jesus means by these words. The Son of Man, that's Jesus, right? Came to seek, and he had to go find them, and to save, to rescue them, that which was lost. Who was lost? Every single one of us. Our children are not just disobedient. They are disobedient because they are lost. Our children do not just make foolish choices. They make foolish choices because they are lost. Our children do not just have trouble getting along with their siblings. They have trouble getting along with their siblings because they are lost. Our children are not just lazy. No. They're lazy because they are lost. Are you catching the theme? Our children don't just resist our authority. They resist our authority because they are lost. Everything we're dealing with is the result of something deeper that must be in our understanding and focus. Now, after this class tonight, you might think, as some parents have thought before, well, if I could just get my children to behave, do right for 3 days, like 3 consecutive days, 72 hours, then I would feel like I had just died and gone to heaven. I don't know. Maybe you would feel that way. I think we might feel that way. As we were talking a couple weeks ago when we were here in the class before we took our trip, I told you about how we were just really focusing on walking with the Lord because we knew that putting 7 people in a vehicle, we had someone offer to give us a ride somewhere. I said, well, we fill up every seat in this vehicle, so somebody's going to be on the floor or on the roof, and we fill it up tight. And you know what that's like, even if you don't have 7 people in your family, when you have kids, it feels like you fill up whatever vehicle you're in, you fill it up all the way to the brim. And some of you only have 1 child, you fill that vehicle all the way up just with 1 child. If you have 2 or 3, you fill it up all the way to the brim. And many parents get to the point where they just would almost do or say anything or pay anything necessary to get 3 days when their children were shining examples of self-initiated, noble behavior from early morning to lights out and in bed. And I can tell you, after just spending 10 days nonstop with our children, we did not have 3 of those days. We did have some wonderful moments, and we both enjoyed those together. In fact, my wife and I were walking down the sidewalk one time a couple days ago, and I snapped a picture of our children walking together, having a fun conversation with each other, and just walking side by side. And I took a picture and I showed it to her, and I said, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. When that unity comes in your family, it does feel good. And you think, why can't we have this all the time? Well, parenting is so much more than 3 days of good behavior, or even 3 years of good behavior, or 3 decades of good behavior. Parenting is about the condition that makes good behavior seem such a hard and elusive goal. So think about it this way. If you were suffering from stomach cancer, you would be focused on the condition that you were dealing with, right? Not just the symptoms of that condition. For example, you would celebrate 3 days free of intense abdominal pain and vomiting, but you wouldn't think that just because you were blessed with 3 days reprieve of pain, that somehow you were well, that it was all over. And you would know that medications that lessen your symptoms, while they are a blessing because they allow you to be more comfortable, they often don't offer a solution to your problem. If you were living with stomach cancer, you would know that you would need help with and deliverance from not just the uncomfortable, horrible symptoms, no, but the condition, the cancer, because that was the cause of every one of your symptoms. It would make no sense for you to just attach yourself to a doctor who was just focused on alleviating symptoms, but had no understanding of the cancer, right? Because that is the same way that it is with parenting. We have to be careful. We don't just attach ourselves to those things or those people that promise to alleviate the symptoms of the problem. Rather, we need to focus on the condition itself. Now, you should always thank God when one of your children listens to you or chooses to do what is right? Those little moments are a blessing. You should give thanks for those good days when your children are compliant, when they listen to you and when they get along with one another. You should be thankful for any conversation that goes well. You should be grateful for those times that you're respected or when your children actually say thank you without being prompted. You should be grateful for those times when the dinner meal is peaceful or your child's room's actually neat. But you mustn't be satisfied with those things. You mustn't allow yourself to think that those things are solutions. You know, the reality is a lot of times preaching and teaching on all kinds of areas focuses more on symptoms than on the root condition that we all face. As a parent committed to being part of what God is doing in the lives of your children, You mustn't be content with just alleviating symptoms while your children are suffering from a condition that is destructive to them and will be a heartache to you. So don't let those moments of good behavior become the one thing that satisfies your heart, because you'll find yourself then just chasing that good behavior and forgetting about the root issue. So we're talking about this idea that our children are lost. What does that mean? Your children are lost. What does that mean? Well, Jesus uses this word lost in picturesque ways. He talks about the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. And in each of these parables that Jesus uses, we get an element or a better understanding, a different perspective on what the word lost or what the condition lost really is. Lost is one of those words that carries with it lots of meaning. Right? If you were to say, I just feel lost right now, does that mean that you don't know where you are? Well, you might know where you are physically, but just don't feel like you know where you are going. The word lost can mean displaced. Lost can mean dead, right? How many were lost at sea? It can mean defeated. We lost the game. We lost the battle. And lost can also mean confused. It can mean a lot of different things. So for the next few minutes, we're going to look at these three parables in the Bible that I think help to capture what the biblical category of lost is all about. Understanding these three parables will help you to begin to get a sense of who your children are and what God has called you to be as a parent. Remember, as a parent, your attention needs to be not only on the behavior of your child, but more fundamentally on the condition that produces that behavior. So you can quit being just reactive in your parenting. Like, oh, they did this. Now what am I supposed to do? But parent in those spontaneous moments with a sense of purpose and direction. So if you have your Bible, turn to Luke 15. That's where we're going to be. And I'm going to see if I can get a little help from you tonight. And we're going to read these passages together. Luke chapter 15. Because in these three parables, I think we see very vivid word pictures that help to shed light on the condition that is the reason for all you have to deal with in the thoughts, desires, choices, words, and actions of your children. So the first one we have, does anybody see it there in your Bible in verses 1 through 7? This is the parable of the lost what? The lost sheep, right? I have a volunteer. Can we read verses 1 through 7 for us? Luke 15, 1 through 7. All right, go ahead, Sandy. All right? So that's our first parable, the parable of the lost sheep. We're just going to read through all of these, and then we'll go back and break them down a little bit. Who would read for me the next parable, the parable of the lost coin, Luke 15, 8 through 10? This is a short one. Got it? Go ahead. All right, very good. Now we're going to read this last one. We'll break it up because this is a little bit longer. We have the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin. This last parable, the parable of the prodigal or the lost son. All right, so this is Luke 15, verses 11 through 32. You have somebody who would take verses 11 through 18. 11 through 18? Yeah, go ahead, George. Very good. All right. Someone else would read, let's see, like 19 through 25. Who would do those? Go ahead and say. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And he was angry, and would not go in. Therefore came his father out, and entreated him. And he answering said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad. For this thy brother was dead, and is alive again, and was lost, and is found. So each of these parables highlights an aspect of what it means to be lost, and it helps you to better understand your experience with your children and your job description as their parent. So we're going to go through, first of all, the parable of the lost sheep. So I think there's three things that jump out of this parable. First, sheep need a shepherd. Sheep need a shepherd. Right? There was this shepherd, and he had this 100 sheep. He had 99 who were with him, but one strayed away, right? One was lost. And so he left to go and find that sheep. Sheep need a shepherd. Why? They need the wisdom, the protection, and the sustenance that a shepherd can provide. Like your children, sheep were designed by the Creator to thrive under someone's care. You should never be irritated in those moments where it is clear that your children need you, no matter what it is interrupting. Right? For the shepherd, his job is to care for those sheep. So it's not an interruption when the sheep has a need. For you as a parent, it's not an interruption when your children have a need, because that is your job, to be their parent. The fact that your children need to be supervised, cared for, and sustained by you is a wise choice of your Creator. Sheep need shepherding because they are sheep, right? So therefore, children need parenting because they're human beings. Remember working as a youth leader and parents would come in with this issue or that issue, and I'd say, listen, God gave you to that child to be their parent, and that's your role, and that's a good thing, so you can parent because God has made you their parent. God wouldn't give you those children if He didn't also call you to parent those children. The needs of your children will get you up early in the morning. They will interrupt you 100 times during the day, and they'll even interfere with your sleep. But dependent is what your children are, and care is what God has called you to. So sheep need a shepherd. The second thing we learn from the parable of the lost sheep is that sheep are prone to wander. Sheep are prone to wander. It's in the nature of sheep to be easily distracted and to quickly be seduced by the lush green grass of the borders just beyond the fold. It's the nature of sheep to blindly follow another wandering sheep. When one sheep strays away, it tends to be a couple other sheep will follow them. So it is with your children. Because of the sin that lives inside of them, children are prone to wander out of the protective instruction, correction, and discipline of their parents. They tend to be influenced by other children who are no more capable of guiding themselves than they are. You ever notice this, right? Oh man, I bring my kids around the pastor's kids, and then they lead them astray. They lead them this way or that way. Or then Shannon, we bring our kids to church, and we got to put them around everybody. And your kids Our kids follow each other, right? Sometimes more than they follow us as their parents. And they're like, please, I'm trying to help you. Most of the wrong behavior of your children is not intentionally or self-consciously rebellious. Sometimes it is, but most often their disobedience is the fruit of their lostness. Your son or daughter doesn't get up in the morning and say to himself or to herself, at 8:30 this morning, I'm going to have an argument with my mom. Or at 7:30 tonight, I'm going to find a way to directly disobey. Or at lunch think, tonight when it's time to go to bed, I'm going to fight and not go to sleep when it's time to go to sleep. So when you interpret their disobedience this way, you tend to take their disobedience as personal, and you accuse them of things that are not in their heart. How could you do this? Why would you do this? What's wrong with you? It's important to emphasize this point because your children will wander, and they'll do it not because they want to make war with you. It's just because they're lost. The sheep are not wandering from the shepherd because they're just mad at their shepherd. No, they're just wandering because they're sheep. They're distracted because they're sheep. I'm not making an excuse to say that it's right to run away. No. I'm not saying that when your children sin, well, they just can't help it. No, they have to learn to walk with the Lord. But the reason they do it is part of their nature to do it. It's part of their condition of lostness. So sheep need a shepherd. Sheep are prone to wander. And third, once a sheep has wandered, he is incapable of rescuing himself. We learn this from this parable, right? Because the shepherd didn't say, well, that one wandered away, right? This is a sheep, not a dog, right? Well, leave him alone and he'll come home wagging his tail behind him. No, it's not true. No, the shepherd knew when that one sheep wandered off, if that sheep ever was going to get back, that shepherd was going to have to go and rescue that sheep. This lost sheep needed someone who would search for him, find him, and bring him home. And so it is with your children. They don't need so much to be rescued from the world around them or from their friends. No, ultimately they need rescue from themselves. There is no greater danger in their lives than the danger they are to themselves. Right in the story of the lost sheep, there was no mean animal that came and carried that sheep off. No, the sheep just wandered off of his own accord. Why? Because they are lost. And in being lost, they carry around inside of them something that pulls them away from the care and protection that God has designed for them and makes them think that they can live more independently than any human being was designed to live. I just want to pause here for a moment and say, though, this isn't just a problem of children, it's a problem for every one of us. We tend to think that we can live more independently than God designed us to live. Just as our children need a parent to shepherd them, so we need our Heavenly Father to shepherd us. Because we need a shepherd. We are prone to wander. And when we wander, we are incapable of rescuing ourselves. You can't save yourself, right? It's only through Jesus Christ that you can have salvation. This means then that parenting is a moment-by-moment, day-by-day rescue mission. It means that as parents, we need to daily remind ourselves that we're called to rescue our children over and over again. And we should not resent those moments when that rescue is necessary. The shepherd goes out, he finds the one lost sheep, he brings it back. All of his friends rejoice with him that sheep was found. But you think about the life of that shepherd, there's a very strong possibility that tomorrow he might have to go and rescue another sheep. He might even have to go and rescue that same sheep again and again and again. So we've seen the parable of the lost sheep. I want us to look at a few things from the parable of the lost coin now. The parable of the lost coin. Now, the parable of the lost coin is not about what it means for the coin to be lost. In this parable, the spotlight is not on the coin, but on the one searching for it. This short little word picture is just 3 verses long. It's a powerful portrayal of God's attitude towards the law. It shows us God's attitude towards the law. Because in the story, this woman had 10 coins, right? And she lost one of them. And then she went and she swept the house and she cleaned until she found that lost coin. This woman intently searched for the one that was lost, and when she found it, she threw a party for her family and friends. The attitude of the Heavenly Father who cares about every one of His lost children. And when they are found, He throws a party with the angels in heaven. So these 3 verses portray with power the compassion, the patience, and the grace that we are called to represent as God's ambassadors in the lives of our children. We're not mad at them because they're lost and need our help. We don't push their lostness in their faces. We don't remind them of how much more righteous we are than they are. And we would have never thought of doing or saying the things that they do and say. I would have never done that when I was your age. I can't even understand why you would think or do this. No, as parents, we should parent with mercy and grace. We live with them with patient hearts, and we celebrate every time they confess or choose to do what is wrong. So this parable is really focusing on the aspect of lostness, not of the coin itself, but of the attitude of the person going and looking for that lost one. So let's look again at this theme of lost in the parable of the lost son, or the prodigal son. Now, I would say on this, we don't have time to look at all the aspects of this parable, but there's not just one lost son in this story. There's really 2 lost sons. Yes, one went away from his father, another one stayed right next to his father, but as we see the older son's response, I think we could all agree that he was lost as well. He didn't understand what he had, even though he was living there in his father's house. And he was angry at the celebration and at his younger brother, because after he was found that they would be celebrating him, and said, nobody ever celebrated me. And I think maybe this parable is the best known, the most well-known parable of all of Christ's parables. I think you could probably write an entire parenting book just out of this one parable alone. But let's consider how this parable pictures what lost means and how it helps us to understand our job description as parents. So first of all, in this story, you are hit with how intense this son is to be out on his own and to experience the world. Anybody else can relate to that? His home offers him everything, but he cannot resist the temptation of independence. He wanted to be out on his own, do his own thing. One of the scary components of the lostness of our children is their susceptibility to temptation. Our children are easily tempted. There's something inside of them that just hooks them to the dangerous things outside them. Again and again, where you want your children to say no, they won't say no. Have you ever found that, right? Where you go, it seems like certain children are drawn to certain things, or they always seem to get caught up in the same traps, or they seem to end up in the same place. Why? Because they are prone, susceptible to temptation. So coupled with the susceptibility to temptation is the tendency towards self-deception. Self-deception. What does this mean? Well, the son in the parable told himself things about himself that were not true. He told himself that he was able to handle what he could not handle, right? I'm ready to get my inheritance. My dad hasn't even died yet, but I want your inheritance. Like, how terrible is that to go to your dad and say, I can't wait for you to die. Give me the inheritance that's owed me now, because I want to go and do what I want to do with my life right now, right? He was deceiving himself that he was ready to handle things that he wasn't ready to handle yet. In the same way, your child is always speaking to himself or to herself, and what they say to themselves is profoundly important. Your child will tend to tell themselves that they are able to do what no child is independently able to do. And this happens in little ways, right? when your child's really small, and maybe it's your little girl, and she gets into mommy's makeup, and all of a sudden you come in and she's covered up because she thinks she's ready to handle this, right? She's ready to do this herself, and she ends up painting her face like a clown, or getting it all over the bathroom, making a giant mess. Or our children, they love to cook with mom in the kitchen, but then sometimes they'll go in and cook when she's not in the kitchen, and you can tell when a child has been cooking in the kitchen as opposed to when mom has been cooking in the kitchen, because there is a mess everywhere. There's just stuff all over the floor. Why? Because they tend to tell themselves, I can handle this. I'm ready to do this. Now, those are probably relatively small things, messes that need to be cleaned up. But we see the same thing happening in our children's choices when it comes to various aspects of their sin. All of this leads to the fact that lost people are a danger to themselves. Would you not agree that that sheep was a danger to itself? That lost son was a danger to himself? I mean, he took and he wasted all of that money, and the Bible says, on riotous living. So much so, he found himself living with the pigs and eating their slop. He realizes, my father's servants have a lot more than I have right now. I mean, he took himself so far away from blessing. Our children, because they're a danger to themselves, they are headed for destruction, and they probably don't know it. Right? This is like your child running towards, running away from mom or running away from dad. Traveling this past week, I'm thankful our children are big enough, they're not running away from us anymore, but you look at some of these little children and they're running away and you're like, no, that's a subway train. Don't run away over there. That's a bus. Don't run away over there. This is a huge museum with thousands of people wandering through it. Don't run away over there. You're headed for destruction, right? You're going to hurt yourself. And so you'll see those things, right? Parents with their children on a leash, or parents with their children buckled in a stroller, buckled and put in a wagon, some way to try to corral them to protect themselves from themselves. So the danger that makes parenting both essential and difficult lives inside your child, not outside of them. And we all understand this. We're trying to protect our children from the dangers that are outside, right? The other people, the other things, the dangers that are in this world. But the danger that they live with every day is the danger of their sin that is inside of them. No child is free from that danger. So you could wrap your child up in bubble wrap, right? And stick them in a safe room and put lots of locks around it and say, I'm not going to let my child have any bad interaction. They're not going to be able to watch any TV. They can't play any video game. They can't do anything that's in any way going to harm them, and yet they will still head towards destruction. Why? Because their lostness is what's inside of them. And that's one of the great challenges of parenting, right? We can't protect them enough from the outside to somehow keep them from what is already on their inside. So as the father in this story of the prodigal son demonstrates, what lost children need most is not criticism, judgment, condemnation, or punishment. What they need most is love. God's kind of love. Isn't it amazing? Yes, children need authority. Yes, they need rules, the enforcement of those rules. Yes, they need to be held accountable for the choices that they make. But lost children, just like this lost son, they need compassion. They need understanding. They need patience, acceptance, forgiveness, and grace. Isn't it encouraging to see that the father of the lost son never gave up, right? When you come to the part of the story where the lost son is returning home, where do we find his father? Father's up and watching for him, right? And he runs to him. He's there on the front porch, if you will, keeping an eye out, ready for him to come home. And this tells us that that father didn't just happen upon that one day. That's where that father was every day. He was looking for that son. He loved that son, and he cared for that son. He was looking for his son's return. What a beautiful parenting model for all of us. Now, here's what you need to understand. The Father in the story, of course, is the Heavenly Father, and the lost Son is every single one of us. And like our children, we are lost apart from God's rescue. Like our children, we're susceptible to temptation. We're a danger to ourselves. And like our children, we need the patient grace of our Heavenly Father. I mean, if all you had to deal with was the occasional bad behavior of your children and regulate and control that behavior, parenting would be dramatically easier. But that's not all you have to deal with. Every day, whether you've thought about it or not, you are confronted with the lostness of your children and how it causes them to resist authority, to want their own way, and to think they can do what they are not able to. Rules don't have enough power to deliver your children from this condition, but the powerful transforming grace of God does. Parenting is about being a tool of that grace in the lives of our children. Now, kind of already touched on this a little bit, but I want to look for a few minutes at two big lies that every child believes. Every child that's ever been born believes two dangerous and destructive lies. And if you pay attention, you can see these lies operating in the lives of your children. The power of these lies should be way more important to you than one bad and frustrating moment that you experience with one of your children. So here's the first lie. It's the lie of autonomy. Autonomy. This lie says that I'm completely an independent human being. We see that borne out in the sheep, right? And in the lost son. And because I'm independent, I have the right to live my life any way I choose to live it. Sound familiar? Right? That's very prevalent in our world, and it's not a new thing. All of us are born believing that lie of autonomy. It's the belief that my life belongs to me, and that I should be able to do whatever I want to make myself happy. Part of this lie is the belief that no one should tell me what to do. Right? Because I'm autonomous. Who are you to tell me? And you will find yourself in these battles with your children. Well, I'm your parent. Therefore, you have to do what I say. But I get to make my own decisions. I'm autonomous. How do you know what's best for me? Parents who fight with a toddler about what to eat are not really fighting about what's on the plate. No. It's not a fight that your child has a different perspective on diet than you do. He doesn't know anything about diet. The fight is about autonomy. It's about that little boy's resistance to rule. It's about his belief that his little mouth belongs to him and that no one but him is going to decide what goes into that little mouth. And some of you know, you have a child that when they decide they don't want to eat something, they have the ability to close their jaw with the force of a pneumatic vice, and they won't open it no matter what you do. You can fly that airplane as many times as you want, and that little mouth will not open to allow those peas or whatever it is to enter their mouth. Now, your child, if they're doing that, they're not defending themselves against peas. No, ultimately they're defending their autonomy. They don't know that no human is designed to live independently. You know, isn't it crazy? They're fighting you when you're trying to help them do something that will help them. I know this when they're really tiny, right? They have a bad, dirty diaper, and you're just trying to help them change it. And you're kind of grossed out anyway because it smells really bad. And by the time we had several children, we finally just started pulling that diaper off, and I'd take them in the shower and just hose them down, clean them up, and then dry them off. And it just seemed to be easy than try to fight them and deal with wipes everywhere, because then I could just kind of hold them under the shower and just hose them off and clean them up and soap them down. It just seemed to get rid of the mess better. Why does children fight things that are there for their own good? Because they believe the lie of autonomy. The battle over what to wear is not a fight about fashion. It's a fight about autonomy. right? When your son comes down and his pants are wrinkled, you need to iron your pants. It's not that he really loves wearing wrinkled pants wherever he goes. It's just, I'm autonomous. I get to make my own decisions. When your daughter comes down and she's got mismatched things on and you're thinking, hey, we're trying to go to church. It's okay if you're around the house, but we're trying to get you dressed up a little bit nicer. But this is what I want to wear. It's not because she has great fashion sense. No, it's because she believes she is autonomous. The fight about whether your teenage son can go to a party with his friends is not about his deep commitment to the celebrations of the community of his peers. No, that fight is about his continued resistance to being told what he can or cannot do. We all, just like our children, resist being ruled. We all, like our children, want our own way. And we all, like our children, set our minds on what we think will make us happy, and we get angry at anything that stands in our way. It's amazing, isn't it, to see the body of a child who isn't even able to speak yet, to see their body stiffen in anger, not only because she's not getting her way, but because she already believes that it's her right to have her own way. And you're thinking, you're this big, and you think you get your own way. Yes, they are born sinners, right? It's shocking to see the amount of anger that comes out of a teenager when his mom says no to his weekend plans. He hates authority, not because he hates his parents, but because he believes that he's the only authority that he needs. Parents every day, you and I deal with the lie of autonomy operating in the hearts of our children. But it's important to see beyond the issue of the moment. Don't just settle for winning a battle about the thing. Rather, each time, fight for the heart behind the thing. Not just about your way or my way, right? Because now it's just two people fighting about who has autonomy, who's in control. Instead, it ought to be an opportunity to say, why do you feel so strongly about it? Why do you want to do this? Well, because I just think I should. And then taking them to the Lord and having them examine based on what the Word says of what you should or shouldn't do. Now, when they're really little, you just tell them no. But as they get bigger, they're going to continue to exert that autonomy. And so as you tell them no, you're going to have to be able to give them a reason why. And the reason why needs to be more than just, I told you so, but to be able to point them to the Lord, to understand that none of us is autonomous. We don't get to make decisions without considering the other people around us. We live as part of a family. And so we have to make decisions as a family. We serve one another. We love one another. And ultimately, we serve God and we want to honor Him and do what He is pleased with. So the first lie is the lie of autonomy. The second lie is equally dangerous because it's the lie of self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency. This lie tells your child that he has everything he needs inside of himself. That's where the prodigal son was, right? I'm self-sufficient. Until he wasn't. And if you think about it, he wasn't self-sufficient at all. Because whose money was he living off of in the first place? Daddy's money. He was living off Daddy's money, but he was self-sufficient until Daddy's money ran out. All of a sudden, he recognized his dependence, his lack of self-sufficiency. And the reality is, he wasn't self-sufficient any of it. Isn't that so important for us to recognize as well? This lie of self-sufficiency tells your child that they don't need your help, rescue, instruction, wisdom, or correction. It doesn't take long before you have to deal with the delusion of self-sufficiency in the heart of your child. Right? This is like the toddler who has just discovered that their shoes have laces that need to be tied. So he sits down and begins to fumble with those laces. He has no idea how to tie a bow. But when you reach down to help him, he slaps away your hand. No, I will do it. You're thinking, no, you won't do it. You do not know how to tie a bow. In fact, you're going to make a big knot, and then I'm going to have to spend time untying that knot. We've had that happen with some children with their, some boys with their swim trunks. I'm going to tie the drawstring on my swim trunk. You know what has happened a couple of times? They'll tie it. Oh, yeah. And they'll put such a knot in it that when they need to go to the bathroom, they can't get their swim trunks off because they're tied on so tight and the knot is so deep that there's nothing that they can do. And you're sitting there as a parent struggling, down trying to untie this child's drawstring, and you think, you would just let me help you do this, you wouldn't be standing there dancing around about to pee your pants, right? But what's the problem? This child has believed the lie of self-sufficiency. Now, this child desperately wants to believe that he can do quite well without your assistance or instruction. The teenage daughter who's arguing with you as you seek to impart to her some needed wisdom is arguing with you because she believes in her self-sufficiency, and because she does, she thinks she has all the wisdom she needs. You've seen this, right? As your children get a little bit older, they think they get a lot smarter, and you as a parent get a lot dumber. And then all of you probably experienced this in your own life now as you've gotten older. You realize your parents maybe were smarter than you gave them credit for back when you were a little bit younger. No, that your parents weren't perfect, but now maybe you start to recognize some of why and how and what they did. No one is self-sufficient. Everybody needs parenting care. To believe anything else is to be dangerously deluded and headed for trouble. The scary thing is that our kids buy into both of these lies. The lie of autonomy and the lie of self-sufficiency. So what do lost children need? What do they need? 5 things I want to give you, and then we'll be done. Number 1, lost children need insight. Insight. The problem with lost children is that they don't see themselves as lost because they don't understand how much they need your parenting care. So our children need not just to be told what to do, but they also need to be enabled to see. We need to look for ways to help them to understand the condition of danger that causes their behavior to be disruptive. And that's a challenging thing, right? And this is one of those reasons why parenting is an ongoing, moment by moment kind of process. Because you're not going to be able to help your 2-year-old recognize all the dangers that they need to recognize at age 2, right? You're going to help them with certain things, like don't touch the stove, right? There's hot dangers. You've heard a little baby or a little child walking around going, hot, 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 because they have begun to recognize that there's danger if they put their hand on the stove. As they get a little bit older, you're teaching them to look out for the busy cars on the street, and when they ride their bike or their scooter or out in the wagon or whatever it is, so that they don't get run over. You begin to teach them about some of the dangers of other people and those concerns in our society and how to protect themselves from them. So, but they need insight. They need you to be giving them that insight to show them, yes, the dangers out there, but also the dangers in there. Shandy and I often will spend time with our children sitting down and really trying to help understand their heart. And not just us trying to understand their heart, but trying to help them understand their heart. Because if you ever ask your child, after they've done something mean or rude or unkind, you say, why did you do that? A lot of times they'll look at you and they'll go, I don't know. Well, it's because they're lost. And so this is an opportunity as a parent not to just look at them and say, you should know. Why don't you know? It's frustrating that you don't know why you did this. Or say, well, that's dumb. No, they're not stupid. But they may genuinely not know why, because they are lost. So they need the insight that you as a parent can give them to point them to Scripture so that they can understand where their sin comes from and why that's such a big deal. And ultimately, of course, you're using this to point them to Christ. It doesn't mean that your 2-year-old is going to get saved, right? They may not have full comprehension yet, probably need to grow a little bit more to be able to fully comprehend what God has done. But even as your child grows up and matures some more and maybe does come to a point where they trust in Christ as their Savior, they still need to be given insight about their heart and the conditions that cause their behavior to be disruptive. The second thing that lost children need is compassion. I'm thankful in the story of the lost sheep, the shepherd didn't get mad at the sheep. The father, even with the prodigal son, doesn't get mad at the son. When the son comes home, he doesn't say, well, finally. No, he says, look, my son has come home. It doesn't make sense to get mad at somebody who's lost. It doesn't make sense to make it a matter of personal offense against you. A lot of parents do this with their children. They make everything very personal. Like, how could you ever do this to me? I've never done anything unkind to you, so why are you being unkind to me? It's not personal. It's just sin. It's sin. It doesn't make sense to condemn a lost person with words or just throw a punishment at them and then walk away. If they need to be punished, punish them, but then love them and encourage them through that and help them to grow. Lost people need understanding and compassion. Lost children don't need parents who are just irritated by their lostness, but rather who mourn it and long for them to be found. And let me tell you, that's a lot easier said than done. Because I find myself irritated about my children's lostness often. And one of the things the Lord has helped me with in this area is when I find myself being irritated by my children's lostness or their foolish behavior or actions, is to get away and spend some time with the Lord and reminding myself who God is and what He continually does for me on a daily basis. To be reminded about the work of the gospel in my life to save me from sin. That God continues to forgive me, and He helps to remind me as my Heavenly Father how I should then behave as a father to my children. So, I'm not saying you will never feel irritated about your children's loss. Now, maybe you will because you're just a better person than me, and that could happen, I guess. But my guess is all of us in one way or another are going to be irritated at times. And so go back to the Lord and be reminded of what He's done for you. And get some help from another parent. Maybe it's your spouse or maybe it's somebody else in the church who can maybe take your kids for a few minutes or a few hours so you can take some time with the Lord to refresh and be encouraged so that you can help to minister to them with compassion. So your children need insight, compassion. Number 3, they need hope. As our children begin to admit the condition that they're in, as they begin to recognize their sin, they need to be assured that help is available. And where does that help come from? My help cometh from the Lord, right? They need to know that not only we are not their adversaries, we're their allies. We'll often say something like this to our children. We are here to help you fight against your sin. Well, if we're going to help you fight against your sin, the first thing you have to admit is you're a sinner. And that you need help. That you need rescue. But remember those lies? Autonomy and self-sufficiency. I don't need rescue. I'm okay. But our children need hope. And even more, they need to know that God sent His Son to earth so when they begin to confess their need and cry out for help, they would have just the help that they need. That God is faithful to forgive. So our children need insight, compassion, hope. Number 4, they need rescue. They need rescue. This goes right to the heart of the gospel, right? Jesus came to seek and to save that which was lost. That's what we started our lesson tonight. Parenting is not a behavior control mission. It is a heart rescue. The only hope for a lost child is the radical transformation of it. As parents, we have no ability to change our children's hearts, but our Heavenly Father does. And we are His tools in the lives of our children. I mean, think about this, right? If we could somehow change somebody's heart, then that means we need to figure out how to do that. And we should set up every Sunday at service just to accomplish that. If you and I could change somebody's heart, then we ought to totally revamp our children's ministry right next door. And we ought to bring in whatever that curriculum is. or whatever that teaching style is, and we ought to set it up and bring these children in, and we perform whatever it is that we do to them. Their heart is changed, and they walk out, and they're a new person. But that's not the way it works. No, parenting is a rescue mission. And it's a work that God must do in their lives. So we can't just settle to announce rules and the threat of punishment and the enforcement of consequences. We're looking for every opportunity to address the heart's issues in our children and praying that as we do, as we address those issues, as we give them insight and compassion, as we give them hope, that God will work the change in them that only He can accomplish. And when God changes their hearts, it's something that only He can do. And I would tell you, as someone who's been a witness of that change taking place in a child's heart, it hasn't happened instantaneously. It hasn't happened even in a few weeks or months or even a week, but just seeing that change taking place is an incredible thing to see. And I would encourage you, if you're struggling to see that in your own children, then just take a look in the mirror and remember yourself and remember the things that God has brought you through. And remember where you were, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And if you're walking with the Lord, see how God has changed and developed and transformed your thinking. He didn't do it because you were just smarter or tougher or more spiritual than somebody else. No. That work has been done because God's grace has been at work in transforming your life. So our children need rescue. And number 5, and we'll wrap up here. Our children need wisdom. Proverbs is full of wisdom from parents to their children, a wise father to his son. Our children need the wisdom to know when to say no. A successful life is all about saying no. Not to your authorities, right? Or to the people you've been called to love, or to God's self, but to say no to yourself. We talked about that this morning, right? You have to be willing to deny yourself. To say no to yourself. In our children's lostness, they will think things that they should not think. They'll desire things that they should not desire, and they'll be pulled down by dangerous emotions and seductive temptations. And if they don't learn when and how to say no, they will end up living as they were never intended to live. You probably heard the saying, right? Sin will take you further than you want to go. It'll keep you longer than you want to stay. And it'll cost you more than you want to pay. So our children need the wisdom that comes from God, but that you and I, as their parents, have the privilege and the opportunity to be able to instruct them in. And I know I've had opportunity to speak with several of you about what you're trying to do to teach your children the Word of God. And that's a great thing because your children need wisdom. Train up a child in the way he should go. And when he's old, he will not depart from it. So, parents, what's the bottom line? As Jesus came to seek and to save those who are lost, He calls us to love and to rescue our lost children. We don't give way to irritation, frustration, impatience, or discouragement. When those things well up in us, we have to recognize that's because of our own lostness. That's because of our own flesh and of our own sin. We need to move toward our children with the grace of forgiveness, wisdom, correction, and rescue. And pray every day God will empower our work as parents, and that He will change our children at the deepest levels where every human being, including us, needs to be changed. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Corinthian church, made the statement, he said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." And ultimately, if you think about it, that's really what we're doing as parents. We're following Christ. We can lead our children to follow Christ as well. We can't fix their losses. Christ can. We can't change their hearts. Jesus. We can't fix their problem, but we can take them to the one who can. But when we respond to their sin with more sin from ourselves, We don't push them to the Father, we push them away from the Father. Because as we've talked about before, remember, God's called us not the owners, but ambassadors. We are representatives of the Lord to our children. So let's make sure that we represent Him well. When you're struggling with that representation because of your own lostness that you're dealing with, take it to the Lord in prayer. Pray for your children. Confess your own sin to God. And seek Him and ask for His wisdom to help you in the great